going to show how to make this bark texture using Affinity Photo's procedural texture filter. There are quite a few bark tutorials out there for Blender and Substance Designer and other software, but I hadn't been able to do it very well with Affinity Photo. I didn't have much luck until I watched a video by Adobe Substance 3D, and that gave me a hint as to sort of a key factor that made this look so much better. So I'm going to show how to make this bark texture. The bark texture consists of three parts. There's basically little chunks of bark, okay, and then there's these stripes, and then there's a sort of a wood grain pattern sort of inset into the bark. And it was that wood grain pattern that really made this look much more realistic. So my basic bark structure is going to be based on cellnoisedist. It looks like this. And to that I'm going to add a little turbulence. Then I'm going to overlay some stripes, and those are going to have turbulence as well, so they won't be just regular stripes. And the last texture will be to add some Perlin noise patterned like wood on top of the whole thing. To get started, I'm going to start with a new document. Choose XGA, set that to 1024 by 1024 pixels. Make sure it's in RGB8 mode. Create that. Fill that with black. Choose the Move tool and add a live procedural texture filter. I'm going to add a single equation, assign it to the three color channels R, G, and B, and then I'm going to add a real number custom input A. I'll label that scale and set that equal to 15. I'm going to want to stretch this out and also rotate it, so I'm going to add a 0 to 1 slider, label that SX. That will be to stretch it. Just to bring that down a little. And then a rotation input, theta, and I'll call that angle. I'm going to set that to 90 degrees. So I'm going to start with a variable SV for my scaling vector, so that'll be used to stretch out the coordinate system, and that will be a 2-element vector, vec2, and that is going to be just SX and 1. And then I'm going to normalize that, and normalizing will transform this into a unit vector, and a unit vector always has a length of 1. And so as SX gets really small, it'll sort of rescale it so it's a unit vector. Now I'll put in my coordinate system, which is a variable, I'll just call it V, and it'll be a 2-element vector. I'm going to use Rx and Ry, so I'll be able to move it around. And then, because relative X and relative Y allows me to drag it with the mouse. And then I want rotatable coordinates, so I'm going to multiply Rx times the cosine of theta minus Ry times the sine of theta, comma, and then Rx times the sine of theta, and plus Ry times the cosine of theta. I'm going to multiply by A and also by my scaling vector and divide it by H, which is the height of the document in pixels. So I'll use that. And just to see if this all works. Okay, so I can rotate it with this one, and I can stretch it with this one. Now I'm going to do my three textures. So I'll start with variable T1 equals the cell noise. So I'll make that my first texture, and cellnoisedist, and that's going to be v.x and v.y. I need to put those in individually, and I'll use 1, and let's just take a look at that. So there's my cellnoisedist. Now I want this to be flat on the top, and just the edges showing. So I could use a step function, but instead I'm going to use saturate, and I'm going to multiply this by C1, which would be a constant, to bring it up to scale. I'm going to put a real number custom input C1 in here, and I'll call this bark saturate. So as I bring this up, it'll get whiter and whiter, but the saturate function will limit it so it doesn't go above 1. That'll be important when I start adding my other textures on top of this. Now I want to add some turbulence to this so the edges aren't so straight. So I'll start with a turbulence amount and a turbulence scaling factor. So this will be TR1 because it's going to be with texture 1, and then TS1, this will be my turbulence bark, and this will be my turbulence scale for the bark. Let's set that up a little bit and bring this down. Okay, now I'm going to add turbulence to both the x and y coordinates. TR1 times dir of TS1 times V, and the directional noise function returns a vector, so I don't want that. I'm just going to take the x component of that vector, and then I'm going to copy this whole thing and paste it right next to the v.y and change that to a y. Okay, so I can increase the turbulence and I can increase the frequency and add just a little bit of jagginess to the edges. Now this is the dir is the linear noise, and so that gives me a straight line connecting the edges, and I sort of like that here because it makes them look, you know, more jagged like bark looks. So that's my first texture. For the second texture, I'm going to set up a series of vertical stripes. So I'll start with variable T2 equals oscillator, and I want it to be the one that's rounded on the top and pointy on the bottom, which is the sqi oscillator, but I also want it to be harmonic, so it adds in both the positive and negative directions. So I'm going to be adding this on to my basic bark, and so I want it to it'll work better if it goes both positive and negative. Otherwise I got to keep offsetting one versus the other, and this will make it a little easier. So I'm going to make it into harmonic oscillator, which ranges from -1 to 1. Okay, for this oscillator I'm just going to use v.y, and I want to be able to scale it independently from the bark scaling. So I'm going to divide by, I'm going to call it A2, that'll be my scaling factor for 2. And so I have to add a real number input, I'll label it A2, and I have to change it to HSQI. Okay, so there's my stripes, and this is going to be my stripe scaling. As I bring this up, the stripes actually get larger. Now I don't want just straight stripes like this, I want them to be sort of more natural. So I'm going to add some turbulence to that, and so I'm going to add a 0 to 1 range input for the turbulence amount, and then another one, or a real number input for the turbulence scaling. So this will be TR2, and this will be TS2. And this is the stripe turbulence. I'll call it turbulence for the stripe. And this is turbulence scale for the stripe. And I'll just set that up a little bit, bring this down a lot. I'm going to leave this sort of low at 2. And I have to add a turbulence factor in here, so I'm going to add plus TR2 times, and this one I'm going to use noisesc, so it'll be, I only need one value, and I don't need a vector here, so I can use the noisesc, and I want it to be sort of smooth, so I want this to vary smoothly. And so that'll be, and then ts2 times my v, and I'm also going to divide this one by a2 just to keep it in the same relative scale as the rest of it. Okay, so there's my turbulence, and so instead of just straight lines, I can have sort of these wavy lines. I think that'll look better. For my third texture, I'm going to use my wood pattern based on Perlin noise. I'm going to start off with a variable t3 equals perlincubic of v comma 10 octaves, and then I'll put in a variable s3 since it's t3 texture 3. I'll call it s3 for the smoothing factor for that. So I'll just get started with that, and then I'll wrap it in an oscillator. So I need to add my s3, and that will be the wood smoothness. Okay, so I'm going to bring that down. So that's going to be the basis for my wood factor. So, but to make it look more wood-like, I'm going to wrap this into an oscillator. I want it to be a harmonic oscillator, and the one I want to use for this is sqi, just like the last one. And then I need to multiply this by a factor, and I'm going to call it C3 times my Perlin noise. So I'm going to add a real number, C3. I'm going to label this the wood grains. So this will be the number of wood grains that I have, and I'm going to bring this up. And so there's sort of my basic wood-like pattern. Now that I've got my three textures, I'm going to combine them into a final texture. So this will be variable tf equals I1 times T1 plus I2 times T2 plus I3 times T3 plus an offset, so I can sort of adjust the overall brightness of this. I'll add 3 0 to 1 range inputs, I1, I2, and I3. Oh, and an offset -1 to 1 input, and that one will be labeled OF. Okay, now this one I'm going to label bark fader. This one I'm going to label stripe fader, and this one I'm going to label wood fader. And this one I'm going to label just overall offset. I'm just going to bring these all down and bring them up one at a time. So there's my overall bark effect. Looks good. Then I have some stripes going on here. I think I want fewer stripes, and I'll just bring in quite a bit of turbulence on that, like that. And then I'll bring in some wood and just a little bit of this, and I think I want a little bit more, not quite so smooth, I want it a little bit more random like that. So there's my basic bark effect. Now I'm going to add color to this, so this will be a 2-color texture. To get my colors, I'm going to add a vec3 of R1, G1, B1, and then I'll put in sliders for the 3 red, green, and blue channels for that. I'm going to multiply that by my TF, my final pattern, and then I'm going to add on a vec3. This will be the second color, R2, G2, B2, and I'm going to multiply that one by 1 minus TF. So those will be the dark areas will be one color and the light areas will be a different color. Now I have to add my sliders, 0 to 1 range inputs, and I'll label this one R1, this one G1, this one B1, this one is R2, G2, and B2. This is red 1, this is green 1, this is blue 1, this is red 2, green 2, and blue 2. Now I'm going to adjust colors. I'll start off with sort of a gray, I think, on that one, and then this one's going to be a little redder. Just bring it all the way down and bring this up a little like that. So those are my colors. I'm going to add a lighting effect, and that's going to help quite a bit, I think. I'm going to add Phong Lighting. I'm not going to show how to do Phong Lighting here. You can either get this file from my Patreon and get it there, or you can look at my previous video. I went over Phong Lighting in that, and I've covered Phong Lighting in a few different videos. So I put together a file with a bunch of different bark patterns, and you can grab this over on my Patreon if you want to grab one of these bark patterns. I'm going to copy the Phong Lighting from over here, and I'm going to paste it in up here. And that'll help out a lot. I'm going to set this to hard light. And I think I want the wood to be, I don't want it quite so much, I want this to be only a little bit. I'm going to set this stripe down a little bit. I'm going to bring the offset up a little bit like that. And I think maybe just a little bit more turbulence and a little higher frequency. That makes a big difference. Okay, so far so good. Now I'm going to duplicate this. I have another one. This one I'm going to set the scale up to 40. Okay, and then I'm going to set this to overlay, and I'm going to change the colors a little bit on this one. That'll just give me a richer color set than the base colors. You can see it's just adding so much more to that. And then I'm going to add, make it a little rougher. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So I'm going to add just a little bit of surface roughness to this one, and I think I'll take off some of my saturation, back off on the saturation a little bit, like that. And I could also, sort of intense, so I could bring this down and just bring up a little bit of this one. And you can tweak this for quite a while until you get, make it look really nice. And it's sort of a little tricky getting everything just right, but I'm going to increase the, I think I want a little bit more defined chunks of bark here, so I'm going to add a little more bark. And maybe even saturate it just a little bit more. Yeah, so you have nicely defined pieces of bark, but you still have plenty of texture on top of them. The bark goes through a range of different colors, mostly sort of grayish, but it really has a lot of other underlying colors built in, and I'll let you mess around with that and see if you can find some good colors. Alright, so that's the bark effect, and this one I made using that same formula. Just spent some more time messing around with it to get the bark to look a little nicer. Try it out, see if you find something pretty cool. If you do, let me know in the comments. And so let me know if you have any other comments or questions. And thanks for watching.